today. And the cooling trend, as well as the foggy trend, continues on Friday and into the weekend. More widespread and longer-lasting fog for large parts of England and Wales, whilst it stays cloudier and breezier for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, live from Downing Street at 9:30 this morning on GB News, your TV and your radio. Today we're going to be dissecting this Downing Street party allegation. We'll be talking about Prime Minister's questions coming up at midday. We'll be talking to a polling expert about what the people of this country think, to a Labour MP and to a former Tory MP about this whole situation. That coming up after your headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's just gone 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson will face MPs in the Commons later as pressure grows for him to say whether he attended a drinks event in the Downing Street garden during the first lockdown. It's going to be the Prime Minister's first public appearance since an email his private secretary sent in the first lockdown inviting 100 staff to bring your own booze gathering was made public. Sir Keir Starmer will return to the Commons today after finishing his COVID isolation. The rollout of smart motorways in England, which uses the hard shoulder as a lane for traffic, has been suspended over safety concerns. The Department for Transport says it's taken the decision following several fatal crashes. New projects will be put on hold until at least 5 years of data is collected. Novak Djokovic has admitted breaking COVID isolation rules when he met a journalist after testing positive for the virus. The tennis star says he made an error of judgment when he chose to fulfil the long-standing meeting with a reporter. It has the Australian government consider whether to deport him following a row over his visa and his vaccination status. The world number one blamed a member of his team for what he called a human error as well in his travel documents. 500 former teachers have signed up with supply agencies as part of a national effort to tackle staffing shortages. Data from the Department of Education shows hundreds of former staff have responded to the call from the Education Secretary to temporarily return to the profession. 1 in 12 teachers, around 44,000, were absent at the start of this term. You are up to date. This is GB News. I'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's go back to The Briefing with Tom Harwood.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood. It's a momentous day in British politics and probably the most important Prime Minister's questions of this Prime Minister's premiership. Potentially the most important Prime Minister's questions of decades. There have been some suggestions this morning this is going to be the most important Prime Minister's questions at midday today since the Westland affair in the mid-1980s. There are many people saying that the Prime Minister's premiership is hanging in the brink. It all depends on how he responds to these allegations of a serious breach of coronavirus regulations in the summer of 2020 in the building behind me. How can the Prime Minister respond and can he recover? Well, let's talk now to Darren McCaffrey, political editor of GB News, about, first of all, the ire not just in the country but on the Conservative backbenches.
Yeah, indeed. Interesting this morning, of course, there was no minister, as there normally is, put up for the TV rounds. A sign maybe that actually very few ministers are prepared to go and we know to date Downing Street's line is that they are not going to comment on any of this until Sue Gray, who's the senior civil servant carrying out an investigation, reports. Now, I think that line is unlikely to hold a Prime Minister's question time today. I think the Prime Minister is going to have to essentially say a lot more than he has done to date. And that is not least of all because, as you touched upon, there is an awful lot of frustration, frankly anger among Conservative backbenchers, that yet again we're back here with allegations of parties that took place in that building or in the garden behind that building. And they know that their constituents, large parts of them, are pretty angry about all of this. I think the calculation also that they're having to make is this going to end? Can the Prime Minister draw a line under this? Can his style of leadership, is it doing more damage now to the party and to the government? Essentially, could it cause them to potentially at the next election? In saying that, as always, trying to get rid of a Prime Minister, and we're not at that point yet. It is not an easy task, as you well know, Tom. It's not easily done. It's not something any party ever wants to have to do. And that will be part of the calculus of where Tory MPs are at the moment in terms of the thought process about what may well happen. You're entirely right in saying this PMQs is going to be crucial to mapping out the next couple of days and weeks for Boris Johnson.
And it's going to be very difficult to rely on this line that Sue Gray must investigate what happened and must investigate whether or not the Prime Minister himself was there. I suppose, very realistically, lots of people, and particularly perhaps the Leader of the Opposition, who we know is out of isolation today after 7 days after testing positive for coronavirus, he'll be able to say, Prime Minister, were you there or not? Yeah. And he can't just rely on Sue Gray.
Well, indeed, because why would you need an investigator to tell you whether you attended an event or not? I think the problem for the Prime Minister is he seems to be slightly snookered in whatever his answer is today. If, for example, he pursues that line of, well, I'm going to wait and see what Sue Gray has to say, that is not going to appease, not least the opposition, his own backbenchers, and indeed the public who are demanding answers now about something that happened, remember, in May 2020, something the Prime Minister should know wholly about, whether he was there or not. Second of all, if he does admit that he was there and apologises for it, which is what some Conservative MPs want him to do, to try and draw a line under that, that raises a whole load of other questions about whether he did break rules, but whether these guys, the Metropolitan Police, who are at each end of the street, knew about it, whether they would have to investigate it. Could the Prime Minister and others potentially face legal action? And so that's where he's in this really difficult position about what precisely does he do, or does he just try and brazen it out, which has to say has been the modus operandi of Downing Street to date. It has to a large degree worked, but what it's led to is this sense that the Prime Minister hasn't always been honest all of the time.
Now, I have to say that this party was almost 2 years ago. And all of these different stories of various Christmas events, of summer drinks, of all of these things that happened during lockdown, they've come out in drips and drabs. I suppose one of the big concerns is there anything more to come? Can the Prime Minister draw a line under this if something further comes down the line?
No, true, and we don't know where these stories have come from. Many of them, of course, have been scooped up by ITV. There are questions about, for example, Dominic Cummings' role in all of this. We know he is someone who mentioned this party last week. He is also someone who clearly wants to get revenge on the Prime Minister. And you're right, we do not know potentially if he or others have more information on other parties or other events or other things that happened in that place over the last couple of years that could do further damage. And in addition to that, we have got local elections coming up in May, and maybe the temptation for Tory MPs is to see how things play out over the next couple of weeks, but crucially to see how this actually affects the ballot box in reality. And looking at the polls at the moment, it's not looking great, must be said, for the Prime Minister. For example, here in London, suggestions the Tories could slump to the worst defeat in 50 years in council elections. And I think that could again be another crucial moment. Also interesting, talking to Tory MPs, what they're also concerned about, if they did start to put in letters to the 1922 committee, and again I suggest we're not there yet, that if Boris Johnson were to win, we would end up in the situation where Theresa May was, in that there is a 12-month block on another leadership race, and so then you end up then getting in essentially to the general election territory, having tried to remove a leader who would then still be in position. And also, as always with leadership challenges, who is there to replace him? It's not clear cut. There would have to be a challenge. Again, that is not easy to go through when you're in government. So B&Q is crucial today. What the Prime Minister does is going to be crucial. And also that report from Sue Gray, and by all estimations she is not someone to roll over, someone who will be determined to try and get to the truth of what precisely did happen, not just, it must be said, in May 2020, but at a whole series of events in Downing Street and elsewhere in government, upwards of 12 throughout 2020, where many of us were essentially obeying the rules in lockdown.
What an extraordinary moment in our politics. Darren McCaffrey, thank you for that analysis there. Let's turn now to the views of a Labour MP. Steve McCabe can join us now down the line. Labour MP, of course. Welcome to the programme, Steve. First of all, what can we expect Sir Keir Starmer to be saying in Prime Minister's questions at noon today?
Well, I think he'll probably simply ask him to come clean. I think there's been too much evasion, there's been too much deception, and I think he'll say that the public are entitled to some straight answers. Boris Johnson knows if he was at this event or not. Boris Johnson knows if he broke his own rules or not. And Boris Johnson owes the public an explanation and an honest answer.
Is there anything that the Prime Minister could say today that would, in your view, ameliorate the situation for him?
Well, frankly, I find it hard to imagine what that might be. I mean, he seems to have boxed himself into a corner. He's reinforced this idea that there's one set of rules for him and his cronies and a different set for everyone else, and he's reinforced the idea that he's a man who can't be trusted.
Now, I wonder to what extent this whole affair, to some people, may seem a little historic. There are obviously huge challenges for the country right now, big problems, whether it's the cost of living, whether it's all of the associated problems to that, gas bills, inflation, and indeed how long this pandemic may drag out. I suppose there is a question as to how much of our focus should be on relitigating a situation that happened 2 years ago.
Well, these are all problems that the Prime Minister has also inflicted on the country, and perhaps if he paid more attention to detail over the years, we'd be in a better situation. But I don't think you can simply say that we'll just forget that he broke the laws that he brought in because, we've got a few other issues to deal with now. I've never heard of that happening in the past. I'm not quite sure if people would be prepared to accept that. Look, I think this has moved beyond politics. My sense is it's the public who are now angry about this. They feel as if they've been cheated and lied to. And I don't think you can get away with that as if it's just a bit of party political knockabout.
Now, your party, the Labour Party, is ahead in the polls. The Tory party has taken a significant knock. There's a lot of confidence lost in the Prime Minister. Are you worried, as a Labour Party, however, that all this has come about due to unforced errors emanating from the Prime Minister himself, and potentially not all that brilliant campaigning or tactics from the Labour Party? You seem to have lucked out due to a situation of unforced errors from the Prime Minister, rather than anything you've done yourselves.
Well, there's always a view that governments lose elections. But, I mean, my sense is that Labour has quite a long way to go in reassuring the public and explaining to the public exactly what Labour in government would mean. I don't think we can take too much satisfaction from the current situation at all. And I don't think that's where Keir Starmer's at. I think he is trying to map out a route to government that's about explaining to the British public what he would do, what he would tackle. I think there is some evidence on things like, obviously, the VAT cut on gas and electricity at the moment, that we are in tune with the public and the government are not.
Well, Steve McCabe, thank you for joining us this morning on GB News and giving your views over what will be a momentous day in British politics. Of course, Prime Minister's Questions coming up at midday today, and we'll take that live on GB News. Well, now let's get the views of what some people in the country think. We've been talking a lot about Westminster over the last few minutes. Let's take us now to the views of the people of Manchester. Our North West of England reporter Bradley Harris has been asking the people of Manchester what they think about Partygate.
I think, people of that stature need to set examples, and we all know people that have died or people that have attended funerals, unlimited people, and at the time that, they can only go to funerals with 10 people, they're drinking and partying, so yeah.
I feel like I would have quite liked to have had a garden party, to be honest, but I didn't. I stayed inside. I think they just need to at least acknowledge it at the very least, to be honest. Just let everyone know that they realise they shouldn't have probably done that, and a bit of an apology in that sense.
It's disgraceful when people's lost their mums, dads, brothers, sisters through COVID, you know what I mean? And that was the biggest lockdown, the first very big lockdown we had, and he's having throwing parties, you know what I mean? But he's a liar, he's a born liar, he's an hypocrite, isn't he? I mean, why are they having an inquiry? He's broke the law. I mean, the Metropolitan Police should be able to do something about that. Other people's been fined, X amount of money, ordinary people in the streets been fined, but not him. Why not?
I mean, considering that day was my birthday and I didn't even give my own mum a hug on my birthday because we were sort of following the rules, it just makes you feel a bit rubbish about it, really, doesn't it?
I feel like if it's a true statement, if the investigation finds that it was happening, then it's a bit of an outrage. It's a silly thing to do from the government's point of view. People that should be setting an example, and they just haven't been, particularly after the finding out of the Christmas party and stuff as well. So I feel like this should be the last straw now for them.
At the end of the day, people are doing what they're going to do. They're going to do what they want to do anyways, and especially people in power, they do what they want. It's the little people that are forgotten.
Well, the views of the people of Manchester there. Let's turn now to Chris Curtis from Opinium, the market research organisation, and an expert in polling. Welcome to the programme, Chris. I suppose, first of all, we've seen a couple of surveys now in terms of what proportion of the British public think the Prime Minister should resign. Up to 2/3 of the British public now saying that the Prime Minister should resign. Is that a very solid opinion, or is that liable to change?
I mean, it's liable to change, like all opinions, and opinion polling at the moment is particularly volatile. The public are changing their minds a lot more than they would have done historically about politicians, about political leaders, about their views of parties. That's one of the reasons why we see such dramatic shifts in the polls now. Having said that, I think this is a pretty difficult situation for the Prime Minister. As you say, 2/3 of the public in one poll yesterday showed the Prime Minister showed that 2/3 of the public think the Prime Minister should resign. We've seen Boris Johnson at his lowest ever approval ratings. His approval ratings now are roughly the same as Theresa May's were when she left office, when she was booted out of office in 2019. We've seen the Conservatives that just 2 years ago won that landslide victory against the Labour Party. They're now lagging behind the Labour Party outside the margin of error in pretty much every opinion poll for a couple of months now. And I think probably the most telling stat of all of them, actually, is we asked the public, do you trust what Boris Johnson has to say? Do you think he's telling the truth when it comes to what happened with the Downing Street parties? Just 12% think that he's telling the truth. That's even fewer than the proportion of the public that think the moon landings were fake. So public opinion right now is not a particularly sort of positive place for Boris Johnson. It's really difficult to find a stat that's looking good for him.
That's an extraordinary statistic, that more people think the moon landings were fake than trust Boris Johnson over Partygate. Although I wonder, given that we saw an incredible dip in Tory approval before Christmas, we started to see that tick up again just last week before these further revelations were revealed. Does that show that potentially when the conversation moves away from these parties and people think about other issues, there's a path back for the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think that's true, actually. I mean, I think we were having a conversation similar to this one before Christmas, and I made fairly similar points, and then came back in January and started to think that actually maybe he might get away with this. And the reason for that was the Boris Johnson's approval rating, which was really bad in December, did seem to tick up. Probably, obviously there was only one way it could go, which was up. But it probably sort of ticked back up a little bit more than I expected over Christmas, which was obviously the fact that these party stories had gone away. And on top of that, the fact that he was considered to have, made the right decisions on lockdown. Sticking with Plan B despite sort of criticism from both sides. So I think that's a big reason why he went back up a little bit quicker. But the fact that this is dominating news stories again means that small tick up is going to look probably pretty irrelevant by the time we get the weekend polls. So yes, I mean, it does show. I think it indicates that point I was making before, which is just how volatile people are, how volatile public opinion is. But I think it is still also fair to say, regardless of that fact, that all of the opinion polls are still pretty negative for the Prime Minister.
Well, it's certainly a very febrile time in British politics. We'll be awaiting Prime Minister's questions and indeed what happens throughout the week. But for now, Chris Curtis, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing on GB News. Well, now we've heard from what the people think, we've heard about the polls, we've heard the view from a Labour MP. Let's talk now to a former Conservative MP. Stephen Dorrell was a Conservative MP for 36 years. Indeed, he was Health Secretary as well, and has obviously seen a number of Tory leaders come and go and seen a number of scandals in his time as well. Welcome to the programme, Stephen. First of all, how does this scandal for Boris Johnson compare to various other scandals that we've seen from other Conservative leaders?
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm no longer a member of the Conservative Party, so I obviously have a political view in this as well. But I in my lifetime, I cannot think of a Prime Minister who is more open to the charge that he regards himself as outside the rules, above the law, and responsible for making rules that apply to other people, you and me, but don't apply to him. I can think of no Prime Minister in my lifetime who is more open to that charge, and against whom there is more evidence that that is how he behaves.
Now, of course, a lot of people were saying this about Boris Johnson before he became Prime Minister. He had record low approval ratings from one half of the public, people who tended to vote Remain, but pretty high approval ratings amongst those who voted Leave. He has, for the time at which he has been Prime Minister, been a divisive figure, I suppose, in that sense. Some people loving him, some people hating him. Do you see that potentially there may be a way back? He doesn't have to win over the whole country, but just needs to win over those people who supported him so heartily 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's always true that a Prime Minister doesn't need, he or she doesn't need to speak for everybody. They need to speak for a clear section of the electorate. Our voting system doesn't require them even to speak for a majority of the electorate. But they do have to have a broad level of support across the different regions of the country and also across different social groups within the country. And I think the problem that Boris Johnson now faces is that the coalition he put together in the 2019 election, there are important elements of it for whom he's now a figure who, A, is personally distrusted, but B, is also not delivering in terms of the policy and the expectations they had of his government. The commitment to levelling up, the commitment to a global Britain, to looking beyond Brexit and making a different future for our country. None of that is being delivered. Now, partly, of course, that's as a result of the COVID crisis, but also his government isn't developing a set of policies that are capable of delivering the objectives that he set for his government in the 2019 general election.
I suppose one counterpoint to that may be well found on the front page of the Times this morning. Now, most front pages of almost every paper this morning are pretty dire for the Prime Minister in terms of Partygate. But this one story from a leading epidemiologist suggesting that the UK may be the first country in the Northern Hemisphere to exit the pandemic, that we might well have timed unlocking and indeed delivered the booster programme just about the most successfully of any country, and thereby going to endemic rather than pandemic COVID. Could that well, if it turns out to be true, be a big point in favour of this Prime Minister?
I think the jury's still out on that point, but I think that there's some grounds for believing that we're past the Omicron peak in London, and hopefully we'll soon be past it elsewhere in the country, and that we are therefore now needing, rightly, to start to think about how our behaviours need to change and so on to deal with the fact that coronavirus is on the way to becoming endemic if it isn't already endemic. I think the issue then, of course, is going to be advice when the government sets out the implications of that for the way we lead our lives and the expectations that we need to have of each other, of the people in our own communities at times when the virus is in circulation. That's going to be coming from a government led by a man who simply broke his own rules at the time of maximum national crisis. As Steve McCabe was saying, in May 2020 was the time of maximum crisis, when daily press conferences were telling us not simply that this is good behaviour, but this is what the law required. And the Prime Minister is seen to have broken the law. Now, it is the most basic principle of a free country that we all live subject to the same laws.
Certainly a very tricky moment there. I'm afraid we've run up to the end of the programme, but Stephen Dorrell, thank you very much for your thoughts. We really appreciate them this morning. That's it for the briefing this morning. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, but at midday it's Prime Minister's Questions, and next it's Patrick and Anaya with To The Point.
Hello, good morning. A reversal of fortunes for many of us this morning, stepping out the door. Much colder in the south with frost and fog, milder and windier in the far north. That's where we're on the periphery of a large area of high pressure, tightly packed isobars across Scotland and Northern Ireland, Northern England, so breezier here with some cloud and outbreaks of rain. But under the high pressure for much of England and Wales, clear skies overnight, and of course that's led to frost and fog. Some dense fog around. Watch out if you're on the roads first thing. The fog will come and go, I think, but where it does occur, it will be fairly dense with poor visibility. Nevertheless, it lifts through the morning. Plenty of sunshine then for England and Wales. Maybe eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland seeing some brighter skies. But in the far northwest, it's dull, it's damp. It's also windy, but mild, 10 or 11 Celsius. Lower temperatures further south, but with light winds and sunny skies, well, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant, I think. And then quite quickly those temperatures drop away this evening, and for the early hours of Thursday, fog quickly reforming. This time perhaps a bit more extensive and certainly a frosty night to come for a large part of England and Wales, but it stays cloudy and milder for Scotland, Northern Ireland, the far north of England. Again, breezy and damp for the far north and northwest, whilst it starts off with some sunshine for much of England and Wales, but certainly those dense fog patches about first thing, and some fog patches could continue into the afternoon. Where that occurs, it will continue to feel cold. Otherwise, sunny spells and decent bright conditions across a large part of England, Wales, eastern and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. Temperatures 5 to 8 Celsius, a bit colder compared to today. And the cooling trend, as well as the foggy trend, continues on Friday and into the weekend. More widespread and longer-lasting fog for large parts of England and Wales, whilst it stays cloudier and breezier for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. This is To The Point right here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and the wonderful Inaya Falarin Imam. We're on your TV and we're on your radio now as well. We're here all the way through until midday, as usual, with a fantastic action-packed show for you.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll be reading that out all throughout the show. But first, as usual, here's the latest news.
Good morning, it is 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright here in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson's going to face MPs in the Commons later as pressure grows for him to say whether he attended a drinks event in the Downing Street garden during lockdown. It's going to be the Prime Minister's first public appearance since details of the leaking of an email sent by his private secretary inviting 100 staff to bring your own booze to a gathering in the first lockdown. Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will return to the Commons today to face Boris Johnson after finishing his COVID isolation. The shadow levelling up minister, Alex Norris, told GB News that the Prime Minister is in a precarious position.